Hi, my name's Rich Harrington, and welcome to this episode of Adorama TV. Today, we're taking a look at the Nikon D600. I'm talking specifically about the camera kit that comes with the stock lens of 24 to 85 millimeter. Very happy with this as a kit lens. I had a chance to take this out and go shooting with it, and I really enjoyed the time. Now, one of the things to realize is that this is FX quality, so it's a full frame sensor, which is great for both shooting stills and DSLR video, particularly if you want that shallow depth of field look or the low light performance. Now, the pixels in this camera, plenty big, 24 megapixels for the shot. And I found that this was a great camera, very, very flexible under lots of lighting conditions. Now, I'm a regular Nikon shooter, so I've got plenty of lenses to already draw upon, so I just go body only on this, but it's a really good feel. A full frame sensor is very hard to come by at that cost, and this is really something new for Nikon. Now, the other things I really like about this is how it feels in the hands. It's a very comfortable camera. You'll notice that it's got a good ruggedized grip, very easy to put in the hand, keep it nice and steady. And of course, like other Nikon cameras, you can modify it with the battery grip, putting the battery grip on the side if you're looking for portrait grip or the ability to put an L bracket on and make it easy to mount this in the tripod. What I like too is it's very reasonable in the weight. It's about 2.5 pounds, so that's a good feeling. Beefy enough that it doesn't feel like a toy, not so heavy that it's going to get in my way of handheld shooting. Now, this particular camera is using the newer X-Speed 3 processing system. Very, very fast processor, lots of power. So in shooting continuous high, about 5.5 frames per second. Works great when shooting at full resolution. Now, you will also find that there's a low mode, a little bit slower, but that's your choice if you want high-speed shooting or slower repeating shots. The other thing to realize is a very effective ISO range. Normal range is from 100 to 6400. Now, I don't generally shoot as high as 6400, but I did push this camera up into the 2000, 3000 ranges. Worked great. The in-camera processing for noise reduction, very, very solid. And of course, if shooting raw, pulling that stuff out in post-production, super easy. Adobe Lightroom or Photoshop Camera Raw, no problems cleaning it up. Now, you can adjust this down to 50 if you need to knock down some more light, or as high as 25,600, although you'd kind of have to be crazy to go that high. That's really just for extreme conditions, like you wanted the shot, you didn't care how noisy it got. But the effective range is just that, quite effective. Now, you're going to find that this has a very good autofocus system, 39 points. This is on par with many of the other pro bodies from Nikon, and it's a USB 2 connection. Now, I'm not crazy that they went with USB 2. They've been using USB 3 for some of the bodies, but USB 2 is still fast. I would say, though, go with a USB 3 card reader. Pop the card out, and if you've got USB 3 on your computer, absolutely use it. And if you're looking for adjusting the speed, very flexible. You can go as long as a 30-second exposure down to a 4,000th. Now, that's going to be a lot of light at that speed, but I didn't have any issues adjusting the shutter speed to get the results that I wanted. Okay, let's talk a bit about release modes. We've got continuous low speed, which is going to give you about 1.5 frames per second. If you want the high speed mode, the one I prefer, 5.5 frames. Now, you're saying, how do you get a half frame? Obviously, if you average this out over time, that's 11 frames every 2 seconds. Very quick. Not the fastest camera that Nikon makes, but certainly plenty quick for many shooting situations. You also have the ability to go to the mirror up mode. Now, usually you'll use that for cleaning, but that could be really useful for very long exposures shooting at night, where you sort of have the manual mode, or you could do a bulb mode. And then we also have the quiet mode, sort of the paparazzi mode per se, where it's going to make a lot less noise. Notice that there are two controls here. I have a lock button here that's going to let me adjust the type of release mode I'm using. And then the top dial here, you have a separate button on top that you push to release that, and now you could change the mode. Now that's nice that that locks, so there's no accidentally getting on the wrong mode as you're shooting or bumping it. File format, all the standards you'd expect. We've got JPEG with lots of different options. You can optimize for quality versus file size if you're concerned. And what you're going to see is that the compression is going to range from basically throwing out 1/4 of the information all the way up to a 1/16. What's most impressive, besides of course that you could shoot TIFF, is the RAW formats. This camera comes with both 12 and 14-bit RAW files. And I'm going to tell you, shooting 14-bit, particularly when doing some high dynamic range photography, was great. I really got some great shots when I was shooting in New York. You're seeing some of the stuff I got there with the buildings downtown, black and white, color, just great dynamic range for those shadows, and I was very happy with the end results. Speaking of HDR, you do have exposure compensation. You've got basically 5 stops that you can go through using a third, a half, or a full stop increment. This means that you could bracket. Now, accessing bracketing, very easy on this type of pro body. You've got a bracket button right there on the side of the camera. You just push it, turn the dial, and you're into it. Realize, though, that this is a 3 exposure bracket. You could do 2 or 3. You're not going to have 5, you're not going to have 7, you're not going to have 9. This is one of those big areas where they kind of cut a corner and give you a little bit less control. But I found when shooting HDR, using a 2-stop jump, so the base exposure, 2 over, 2 under, that's going to give me a great job, especially with the RAW file. It made for some very attractive HDR files. If you want to record uncompressed video, which makes this really popular, we're actually seeing this camera used on some TV shows and television commercials, full uncompressed HD video out the HDMI port, just like the D800. Very happy to see that they carry that functionality down to the camera model below the D800. We've also got very straightforward things like the ability to do autofocus while shooting video, and it will pick up on faces and do its best to help you, total control over audio inputs, and the ability to go all the way up to 60p. So a wide range of frame rates that this is going to go ahead and do. Now, unlike earlier editions of cameras, we do have some flexibility. If you're recording in high quality mode, you can record about a 20-minute clip. If you're using the standard quality, that's about 30 minutes. And this is dictated by the file size limit of what goes on the card. Now, you are writing standard movie files that are going to work with just about any NLE. Some will want to transcode it, others like Adobe Premiere Pro will bring it in perfectly fine, and high quality PCM audio, very low compression, good quality sound. So what I'm real happy with is that they added support for all the standard frame rates in both 1080p and 720p. Very, very flexible and gives you lots of options when shooting. You've got the ability for USB 2, and all those ports are available right on the side of the camera. You'll notice separate controls. One of the ones that I'm most happy with is the fact that we actually have a control port here, allowing me to connect other devices, an intervalometer, or the device we recently reviewed on Adorama TV, the Gigapan head. This allows for remote control or interfacing with the camera. And there are a couple of optional connections that you can get as well. This camera will work with Nikon's WU1B connector, which allows you to have Wi-Fi functionality, transferring pictures off directly, or you could also use an iFi card in this, and we've reviewed those on past episodes of Adorama TV. So that will fully work with this camera. And if geotagging is important to you, check out the GP1 unit, which will allow you to geotag the photos. I really like how easy it is to see things on the back of this camera. Very high quality, very easy to see, and like typical Nikon fashion, you can cycle from what you're seeing, some overlays or the ability to actually see histograms. Now, lots of other controls, the ability to adjust the brightness of the monitor itself. Be careful with that because you don't want that influencing your decision, but if you're shooting in a very low light environment or very bright environment, the ability to adjust the monitor can come in handy. And it will actually adjust using an ambient lighting sensor. So as the lighting around you changes, the camera will do its best to try to tweak how it's displaying the information, giving you a more accurate display. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the additional options in this camera. In-camera time-lapse. Very, very cool if you want to record a shot directly to the card. Now, you don't save all the original source images, but it does make an actual time-lapse movie. And the ability to do multiple exposure, not bracketing, actual multiple exposure, where in camera it's going to combine those. So if you want to do some artistic photos or you're experimenting, experimental type photography where you're taking multiple images and layering them together, or crowd scenes, this could be really cool. And of course, in camera HDR and bracketing. Now, it's not as extensive as some of the D-line series from Nikon, but very, very good controls. All right, let's take a quick look at some of the essential menus and just walk you through. No big surprises here. It looks a lot like most Nikon cameras, but total control, which is really refreshing. All right, let's take a look at some of the menu settings here. You see we've got some nice controls. I can go ahead and see the full frame image, or pressing up on the D-pad there, I could switch and see some overlays, and this is nice. Now, I did use some of the in-camera bracketing here, and you see we've got some HDR photos just waiting to be made. This camera does have built-in HDR ability, although I'm still a bigger fan of doing it in post on my own. And you're seeing some of the multiple exposures that we talked about, ghosting multiple shots together. I do recommend you shoot off of a tripod in this case, because if you're going to go ahead and do some in-camera compositing, you're going to want those layers. Besides that, let's jump on over here to some of the shooting menu, and you've got the ability to decide how you're going to store the files. What happens here is that you could choose specific folders if you want to target them, letting you organize while shooting. And remember, we actually have 2 card slots here. Now this camera does shoot to SD memory cards. We're seeing that as an emerging trend on a lot of entry-level pro bodies. But you have the ability to decide if you want to shoot the same image to both cards, so you have in-camera backup, or overflow from one to the next. You can also do RAW on one card and JPEG on the other. If that's the case, I'd put a 32 gig card in one and an 8 gig card in the other, so you're going to go ahead and balance those out. Notice that it has the ability to detect if you've attached a DX type lens. It'll automatically crop, and you can even specify if it's FX or DX, how to handle it, what the crop factor is going to be. So to that end, if you're just getting new into full frame sensor shooting, you can grow your lens collection, but you don't have to abandon what you've already been using. And lots of other custom settings. Nikon is known for having a very extensive menu system and really great controls here. I like the in-camera time-lapse controls, the in-camera RAW controls. Now, there are a few things missing as you're working through here, and some of these are just really tied to things like multiple exposures beyond 3, or some of the extra options here for the number of autofocus points. But 39 is still pretty impressive. And we can also go in and really start to tweak the setup. I like the ability to have my own custom user settings as well as switch between those. And of course, very useful, the ability to clean the image sensor right in the camera, so you can do that at startup and shutdown, or manually pop it open if you need to do it by hand. All right, beyond this, we've got the standard retouching menu inside of there. For those of you that need to do in-field processing, some quick cropping, adjusting, boosting the skin tones. I still greatly prefer post-processing, but this is pretty flexible. Notice that we can do things like actually do color processing and have the ability to decide how the RAW file is going to be worked with. Let's open one of these up here. And you see I could go in. I'll go into fine mode for the image quality. I could compensate for the exposure, bringing it up or down right within the camera. This is one of those multiple exposure modes where we have ghosting on purpose. I could change the color profile, popping to vivid or monochromatic in this case, and even go through and clean up the noise reduction. And you see that that's pretty standard. The ability, of course, to also change the color space if you're working with sRGB or Adobe RGB, and then even do things like tweak the lighting, and that looks great. So all of that is right within camera, so still pretty flexible, particularly if you're in a hurry and you need to get a usable file out from your raw source material. In closing, very, very satisfied with the D600. A lot of folks had some criticism of the D800. They thought the megapixel count was too high. Very reasonable on this one at 24. Seems to be a good balance of the sensor size to the total megapixel count that it's doing. I found its performance in different lighting conditions to be very good, and I really liked the raw formats that I was pulling out of here. Got great HDR using the in-camera bracketing, 1 and 2 exposure compensation stops, and then post-processing, both using Photoshop and Nik HDR FX Pro. So if you're looking to get into the full frame sensor market, the D600 is a very good camera for that. Feel free to jump in and take a look at it, and head on over to Adorama.com, where we've got additional product reviews, information, and kits that you could check out.
Adorama TV is brought to you by Adorama, your best source for the equipment and knowledge you need. For all the latest photography, video, and computer gear, visit Adorama.com. Place your order by 7 p.m. and it ships the same day. Plus, the next time you're in New York City, be sure to visit our store, located on 18th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue. Check out the Adorama Rental Company for professional cameras, lighting, computers, and more. We'll help you make the best selection to match your needs while giving you the knowledge to achieve the best outcome from your rental. Adorama is your complete solution for equipment, printing, training, and more. Adorama, more than a camera store.